formal annexation of the Punjab region in 1849 and the resultant loss of Sikh political sovereignty through the destruction of our indigenous modes of living and our indigenous structures, we've been confined to the psychosocial structure of the state and its nationalism. We've continually fought against this confinement, from Bhai Maharaj Singh's rebellion to the Babbar Akalis to the Khalistan Lehr. Still, this confinement exists both physically and in how we think about and organize for our liberation. One of the clearest confining mechanisms that's in front of us is the structure of the state itself and the colonized world order that creates, maintains, legitimizes, and perpetuates this structure that we know as India. The other dynamics of this confinement are more subtle, but no less pervasive and detrimental, such as our displacement into the diaspora, the cultural impacts of nationalism and European colonization, the way we've internalized our exile and domestication as citizenship. And it's something that we feel obliged and grateful for, something that we celebrate as progress, which is visible in the ways that we've made the exploitation of our people in colonial wars Sikh history, a Sikh history that celebrates our contributions and our arrival into the displacing conditions of the diaspora. Following the farmers' protests, many people in our communities, perhaps for the first time, were dramatically confronted with the problematic and violent nature of the relationship Sikhs and Punjab have with the Indian state. Yet still, the protest itself did not bring all the issues to the surface for many of our people. And it definitely did not bring Sikhs and Khalistan to the so-called world stage in any positive way. And we were continually told during that protest that this isn't the moment. But for many of us, this was the exact moment where we can talk about colonization, talk about all of this larger context and our liberation. The same narratives that the Indian state had been repeating since the 1970s played out, and their lasting impact upon Sikhs who also came to the surface. And one of the most visible ways is when Sikhs were holding the placards that said, "We are farmers, not terrorists." And this message in reality is about distancing from Khalistan due to the internalized fear of the state and the lasting impacts of genocide. And this distancing wasn't just about Khalistan, but about Sikhi in general. Because of the intimate relation between Sikhi and Khalistan, the fear was always that this protest would take a different turn, that it would be infiltrated, that Khalistanis would take advantage of it. And that turn towards something different, something more, was vocalized by Sandeep Singh. That's why he became endeared to the Panth in the way that he did. And the eruption that we saw at Sandeep Singh's funeral of "Ye Sadi Mazboori Hai, Khalistan Zaruri Hai" had been building for years. That feeling was nurtured by Sandeep Singh and made visible on the stage at Shambhu Morcha. And this Sikh feeling for Azadi that has taken the form of many struggles has been nurtured at many points, crystallized in a lot of ways by the existence of Sant Jarnail Singh themselves. And over the past 10 years, we've seen 6 mass mobilizations from 2012 with the Bhai Balwant Singh Rajwana protest, December 2013 with the hunger strikes for the release of political prisoners by Gurbakh Singh, from November 2015 when the Sarbat Khalsa took place, and rejecting the politics of Hindutva and the infiltration of these politics into our institutions such as Akal Takht was a key spark for the 2015 Sarbat Khalsa. And then again in December 2015, we saw the Bargari Morcha. October 2020 to December 2021, the farmers' protests, and the Sikh mobilizations that were layered within that protest, such as Dilli Chalo and the Qabza on Lal Killa. And then most recently, the mass mobilization at Fatehgarh Sahib during the Bhog of Sandeep Singh. Bhai Maninder Singh, the founder of the Khalistan Center and the Mukh Sevadar at Gurdwara Sahib, the Smesh Darbar, will talk more about this dynamic between Sangharsh and Sandeep Singh in much more detail. I want to draw your attention to the dynamics that are in front of us in this moment. In relation to Khalistan today, we see 2 main threads or hubs of movement and struggle: reform and revolution. And these dynamics in themselves are not unique to the Sikh struggle. They're visible in every struggle, but for Sikhs, they have become intertwined in particular ways. Reform and revolution are not the same thing. Reform is about improving conditions, and revolution is about imagining alternatives and fighting to build them, and not compromising on principles, but letting principles define the nature of the struggle itself. Those that advocate for reform claim the goal is the same, just their steps are more intelligent, more mature, tactical, and address our conditions now with this longer term goal of liberation. And this type of politics is about inclusion, recognition, and representation, often through votes in the UN. I'll give a key example that occurred yesterday, or the day before yesterday. There was a page on Instagram that's quite popular, and it shared an image of a helmet that the Indian Army had produced for Sikh soldiers to be worn over their dastars. And many Sikhs liked this post and were engaging with it and commenting on it. But the inherent contradiction of military equipment that the Indian state's creating that never serves our interests, in fact, will be used against us, and the contradiction between Khalistan and this whole mobilization, this whole eruption around Deep Sidhu and Indian nationalism and militarism didn't really come to the surface. And that's one of the ways like Indian nationalism is intertwined with these larger conversations of reform and revolution. Reformist politics are characterized by their reactionary issues-based nature, and reformists seek to dominate the conversation at key moments to reinforce their methods as the only serious methods. They often talk about how conditions have changed, that armed struggle is no longer feasible, that it's damaging, or they keep a distance from this type of politics, making a big show about how, in fact, they are the most radical when they have no vision beyond participating in elections and recognition from the West and the United Nations. The revolutionary position does not desire recognition or inclusion into structures of oppression. In fact, it names those structures as structures of oppression. They do not reject armed struggle, and they build in a much more deeper way and often have much more substantial work to show for their efforts, because the revolutionary position requires and demands a much more serious approach. Whilst reformists carefully navigate the violence of the state, often blaming their own people as being our worst enemies, revolutionaries recognize that the actual enemy is the state itself and move with a deeper sense of empathy and love for the people, despite facing arrest, police raids, travel bans, financial sanctions, and death. Revolutionaries recognize the importance and place of theory in the movement, not as analysis that is detached from the movement, but something that's forged within it, informed by it, nurtured by it. And there's a space between reform and revolution that we've seen, these moments of revolt. And these moments of revolt are important, and they define how we choose to move as a collective. And the moments of revolt within the Morcha itself that we saw, such as Dilli Chalo and Lal Killa, and the rupture after Deep's death, and so many more beyond that time. And there's a lot of gray area between reform and outright revolution. And these moments of revolt are all about mobilizing the ground, political education, and building the consciousness we need so we can set the stage for revolution and outright revolt. It's not only about honoring Deep, but honoring all those like him that came before him, that planted the seeds for these moments of resistance and revolt. Today, we see these very different types of politics become intertwined for many reasons. The fracture of generations of state violence itself, which has displaced us and confines us, trying to sever our connection with more radical possibilities and ways of organizing, and a lack of tangible commitment to the struggle beyond these moments of emotion and rupture, such as people not taking the necessary steps to become informed about the reality and the histories of the Khalistan struggle. And in many ways, social media discourse is exacerbating the decline in actual serious Bantic discourse. And we have to think beyond social media to building our networks on the ground and connecting with each other in much more sustainable ways. And I'll wrap it up with this final comment. There's a number of important questions that we need to think about and organize around. And one particular question in this moment is, what opportunities there's the fragmenting of all political parties in India and their loss of legitimacy in the eyes of even previously patriotic Sikhs present to the Panth. And that's the moment that we're in right now. Post the farmers' protest, all major political parties have lost any semblance of legitimacy. And the Indian state is in this desperate bid to find the new Sikh overseer, someone that's legitimate in the eyes of Sikhs, because as the farmers' protest proves, and the ongoing geopolitical tensions with the border with China and the amount of resource militarily India is investing in Kashmir, that India can't afford and doesn't want an outright conflict with Sikhs. They're making these overt shows of normalizing the relationship with Sikhs. The announcement of Birwal Divas, the Modi's, prominent meeting with so-called Sikh leaders, and to all the social media commentary that the BJP government is putting out, and presenting Modi as someone who's very amicable and friendly towards Sikhs. There's documents that have gone around in the diaspora of everything that Modi's done with Sikhs. Recently, Amit Shah went to Akal Takht and received a Saropa. So the Indian state is very heavily invested in normalizing relationships overtly. And we all know that there's a desperate desire for an alternative through Sikh resistance. And everyone should know what's coming next. The jail administration has been centralized under the command of Delhi. The border security force has been given increased jurisdiction 50 kilometers in from the border with Pakistan. The ground has been set to clamp down on the next decade of repression. The Indian state's nature never changes. It will always meet any form of Sikh mobilizing and organizing with violence. The RSS is making even deeper inroads further into society, and the BJP is tightening their stranglehold on all local politics. So from that introduction, we'll move over to Maninder Singh. I can see Vijay is with us. And Maninder Singh, just to open up the discussion, I have a question for you. As someone who's been organizing and building in the Panthic space for over a decade, what stands out for you in this moment? What does honoring Deep Sidhu mean to you?
I think I'll start just with some context at least, and then get to the question around like honoring Deep Sidhu, honoring what's kind of happened now, and then kind of reflect Fatehgarh Sahib and other places around, and things that might make sense and some things maybe that don't make sense to some. And I just want to be able to help provide some context. There's a lot of people on here that probably have discussion points, questions, thoughts of their own, and hopefully we'll share all those as well. So I wanted to give some context to the Galbat, that as in the space we're speaking from, very clear. If we're speaking from like a state of really have a starting or an end, it's just that we're stuck in this kind of like whirlwind of trying to justify all of our actions at all times, and then seeing Deep separately from others that have come before him or those that will come after, and rather than seeing him as like something very separate, I think Guru de Sikhale, one of the biggest things that you can have is that je thanu koi kehanda ki tusi Guru di soch nu age vadaya hai karke soch ta sari Guru di hai. So the soch that we're talking about, ye Padshahi di soch ya, Raj di soch ya, Sach di soch ya, Sach Akal Purkh da roop ya, and if Deep extended that soch, then we look at our brother as somebody who extended Guru Sahib soch. Naale ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੱਡੀ ਵਡਿਆਈ ਹੋ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੀ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਇਆ. So I want to put that into general context as to like, what are we doing? So if the first thing we look at is everything Deep did or said, everything that we're doing right now, as to like which box you're playing in, that has to be that it's not I said this last week in a talk that I did, that it's not a question of what's right or wrong. The question actually is who gets to decide what's right or wrong. And if it's a state narrative as to like the state gets to decide what right or wrong, then we've been wrong since Guru Nanak Sahib, and we've done nothing right since then if the state decides. But on the flip side, like Sanu, like Maharaj de bhi bachan hai ki Sri Akal Purkh ke bachan se ho pargate ho Panth Mahan, Granth Panth Guru Maniye Tare Sagal Kulan, that the Granth and the Panth are the ones that get to decide. And with that, that's the only kasvati we have, or the only focal point we have. Who decides what's right or wrong? Because your entire clash of the Khalsa with the entire world, its structures, its politics, its political machinery, and the geopolitics we live in today is that clash of kene taya karna hai, sahi te galt ki hai. And for us, it has to be Guru Granth Guru Panth. I won't get into all the historical things. It's usually what I do anyways, and some of the things that I talk about. But you can get from that that's the data we have to speak within. That everything that's around us shouldn't dictate. We shouldn't water down our words. We shouldn't compromise or dilute anything when we're in these spaces. That we can speak as Sikhs, as the Panth when we're here. So the question being like, what stands out in this moment? I think the most of it is the culmination of what's happened over the last 5 or 10 years. Deep has brought like a focal point or a culmination of the events of the last 10 years or so. There's been immense amount of seva from people around the world, Jathebandi organizations, but just individuals that have kept the soch of Khalistan and Raj and Padshahi alive. Those of us that are old enough to remember post 95, some of you might not even have been born in 95, but post 95, I was in mid-teens. And after Paitala was saying, there was a period of about 10 years at least. In those 10 years, I think there was very little discussion around Khalistan in any serious terms. Most people in the West were reeling and running away from the idea. Punjab, obviously, because of like the physical and psychological trauma that was inflicted, was in its own state of disarray. There's multiple kind of factors that led to like the last decade or so from 2010 onwards, and you saw Morcha from the Kesri Lad Morcha with Rajwana, you saw like the Vindapal Singh Puller's Fancy, you saw things like Sarvat Khalsa that happened. All of those things kept coming, kept going, but in and amongst all of that, there was this watered down, compromised dialogue that was happening. No one wanted to actually say what was actually core to what we were trying to do, because the entire conversation was framed within the context of like discrimination. That discrimination, like as in like I've heard like a Vidwan say that as in the idea of discrimination becomes is that you're within the state. The state still dictates everything. What you're looking for is some recourse. You're looking for a place to take your grievances as somebody who's discriminated against, to go and get what we would call today is justice, quote unquote, within the political machinery and the judiciary of that state. And that's what we've done over and over again. When it comes to political prisoners, when it comes to people that are fighting for like Khalistan, they themselves are the ones in jail, yet we're not allowed to say Khalistan when we go and fight for them because we might screw up their cases, which they've been in jail for 30 plus years. The narrative constantly flips to something that works within the political machinery of the state. And as long as Sikhs stay within that kind of narrative, there's no threat to the state, because you will have to use the state's political machinery, the judiciary, everything the state has given you as recourse for your grievances, but you remain within the state. And that's where I think Deep's narrative was more aligned publicly, more than anything, more publicly with Sant Jarnail Singh's narrative. The narrative of Gulami is completely different than slavery, is completely different than the narrative of discrimination. Because out of discrimination, there's constant solutions that you can seek within the state. And simply within the idea of Gulami and slavery, there's only one out, and that's azadi, or freedom. So the only thing that will come out of Gulami is freedom. You don't deal with the state at that point anymore. So I think those are things that we have to kind of like look at, that as like there's these problems that how we approach situations. And Deep's was very clear. Deep's became more and more clear as you moved. Like when we look back 3 months ago, like I'll give you an example, then you look at Deep in the same halat. I think it's important because you do, and this isn't a comparison, but it's a comparison of situations that many Sikhs in the past have found themselves in, and it's the same situation as Guru Sahib found themselves in. But it's a reflection of when everything's gone, then what does the individual do? And moving through the most difficult situations. So like the idea that this moment, like what does it represent, is that what we saw in the last year and a half from Deep was, if you go back to like 1699 and Vaisakhi, and I've stated this before, so I'll do it in very brief terms. But when Maharaj gave Amrit, they gave Amrit, and this is, I want to use this because it's not an idea of numbers. Numbers mean nothing. There's no such thing as majoritarian politics or democracy within the Panth. because not everyone has a say and not everyone is a part of the Panth. And that's a discussion maybe for another time. But within the Panth that's moving, Jira Jangi Khalsa at the end of the day, within that spectrum, when Guru Gobind Singh gave Amrit, there might have been 100,000 Sikhs there. Based on majoritarian politics, less than half took Amrit. It doesn't diminish the idea of Amrit at all. It just means that our buddhi isn't even close to where it needed to be at that time or even now. Amrit is a dat at the end of the day, or a bakshish from Guru Sahib. The point of this is that less than half took it, but still 40, 50,000 Sikhs must have taken it. 5 years later, when Anandpur is like surrounded, there's only 2,006 with Guru Sahib inside when the Pahadi Raje and the Mughals invade and occupy. When Guru Sahib left 8 months later, nobody came. People left, but nobody actually came. When they left, they had less than 406. When they reached Sarsa Nadi, they had less than 200. When they crossed, they had between 40 and 45. When they left Tumkaur, they had 3. When they were in Machiwada, they had like no one. Because when they left Machiwada and Ghani Khan, Nabi Khan's Modde, as Uchda Pir, and they reached the Rondi Sabo, and then they left Punjab forever. That period is representative of how Sikhs should behave when the worst of the worst situations come forward. And this is not a direct comparison, but it shows in an environment and a situation when Deep in January 26th happened last year. And it's amazing that it was only a year ago. And it feels sometimes like a lifetime ago, but it's a year ago, almost like 13 months ago. When January 26th happened, Deep was completely isolated and alienated by almost everyone. He was on the run, as most of you know. He was showing up, on like social media here and there. And there's a very passionate, emotional video he did when he was sitting in a tent with like nothing around him except for like empty water bottles, all alone, and all major political parties, so-called Panthak people, everyone almost had abandoned him at that point. And his narrative never changed. The idea there is the Sach and the truth doesn't change just because your halat change. Made to made halat hi aajan, uthe parak hundi hai. And that was a parak. And he was seriously, if we think about it, just 3-4 months into that type of politics. Shambhu was happening around September, October, leading into Sikhs moving towards Delhi in November, even though the Kisan unions and Ogaraha and all these people publicly stated that they would not go to Delhi. It was Deep that actually at Shambhu that started that morcha. But he'd only been involved in Sikh politics for about 3 or 4 months at that time. But he had drirta in him, he had anak in him, and he had a willingness to learn. So for me, like what he symbolizes now for us is this idea that as in a very short period of time, how much you can advance your soch. And if you listen to him talk, when he used to talk about Guru Sahib, he spoke about Shaheeds, he spoke about Sanjana Singh, he spoke about Khalistan. He didn't shy away or run from the term. He used the term openly, because in his politics, Gulami will breed Azadi, and Azadi is Khalistan. So he wasn't running from the term ever. And if you saw Fatehgarh Sahib in the last couple of days, a lot of people commented, messaged this, that, and the other, that why didn't they say Khalistan from the stage? Probably the same reason they didn't say it in 2015 during the Suvat Khalsa. And when somebody did try, they dragged them off the stage. There's this problem with this idea that take the narrative and it shifts. After somebody passes away or we have a major akat of something, the politics of the Dunyavi politics seems to seep in and take over. So constantly we're at this like clash, like as in like of what's actually happening there, is between there's the Sikh people and there's naujawans, and then there's this buddhi leadership that won't get out of the way. And Shamsher said something earlier, there's a problem with actually how that is going to in the future touch on Sikh politics, if not lead Sikh politics. So for us right now, like as in like if we could look back at the last 40 years of this Sangarsh, and you look at you can pinpoint almost as to where things have gone basically in horrendous kind of like directions, but they've always been Chardi Kala. Like everything is always Chardi Kala. Like as in like once you pin down as a Sikh, this might sound a little bit more philosophical than practical right now, but a lot of these things have to go back to Gurbani. It has to go back to Gurmat, it has to go back to that, it has to go back to our Rani Bani, because the morcha, this morcha isn't political. It dharam da morcha hai. It dharam di ladai hai, dharam da sangarsh hai. And dharam is righteousness, essentially in the loosest terms that you can try to explain it within English, but dharam is dharam. like as in ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਿਰਤ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਧਰਮ ਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ. So everything comes back to, if dharma is not a focal point in this sangharsh, then this sangharsh can't be one of a Sikh. Then it's turned into dunyavi politics. Then it's one of anger, it's one of revenge, it's one of hatred, and all these things that Guru said, we don't have any of these things. Then it comes down to another thing as understanding. And I do believe that Deep did have a solid understanding of Sikh politics as he was moving into this year, especially. He learned from many things he was doing. He had people around him that were helping him learn, but he was constantly learning. Like he would reflect on himself as in not even the jutti of the shaheeds of the Qawm. He would refer to himself as a kukur. He would refer to himself as in like he's not a Panthak Balara. He would even point out the fact that he hadn't taken Amrit and Guru Sahib Kirpa Karnge, because he understood these are bakshishes from the Guru. Main Guru da Sikh hai, and I'm on a path right now. Main pahunchunga unse tak. But that respect was there. He didn't try to justify his weaknesses, because often those kamjoriyan that are within people like me, you justify them and then they become like the Panth's kamjoriyan. If I can't say something or do something, it doesn't mean Sukha Jinda were wrong. It doesn't mean Sukha Singh Matab Singh were wrong. Otherwise, like as in like our entire history is a reflection of those that were the strongest amongst us, and those that we should be actually trying to live up to. So for me, like as in like Guru Sahib did something for us that I think we kind of like lose touch with as to like living in the West, especially. So I want to point that out, and then I'll kind of pause there if there's any like other discussion or somebody else is going to speak. But I want to kind of end it on this, to just this opening context piece. That when you see Deep, there are reflections of such. And you know, Gurbani says, "Sach prana hobe na sita kade na paate, sach akal purkh da roop hai, such is eternal. Akal is eternal." So as in like at the end of the day, akal purkh di fauj hai. That's who we are. And then we have something that nobody else has. But Guru Sahib said something to us, like as in like that I want to kind of like frame it in that way so I can end this point hopefully pretty strongly. Is like there's something in Panth Prakash that says that Jab Satgur Khaduge Chuka, and then that means that when Satgur raised the Khadug with the Tega, the Shastras, the weapons, there's Panth Vadavan Upay that he wanted to move the Panth forward. And then when they took that step, which the Khadg represents the struggle, the Sangharsh. Like you can take it for its literal meaning if you want, or you take it as the overall Sangharsh. But the point is that Satgur came into the battlefield, into the Ran Maidan to move the Panth forward. And then at that point, Het Vadeo Sangh Khalsa, that as in he wanted to move the Khalsa forward, or they sab piche pai, that everything that he had done then, that sara kuch piche reh gaya hai. That once you come into the Maidan, you become part of the Panth. You're in the Panth actually has a hand over you now. That you and the Panth become this Panth Parivar, which is the most significant Parivar that we'll ever have. And these things for us, these Bolabale, these Paratan lakes that are around, is that what it's saying is Guru Sahib entered this Maidan to move the Panth forward. When they entered the Maidan, they left everything else behind, personal relationships. And you can see that with Guru Gobind Singh. Like, from his mother, his father, like to his children, everything was left behind to move the Panth forward. And if you look at people that were in every Sangharsh since then, they did the exact same thing. From the Shoda Kalukara to the Vadda Kalukara to the missiles, to Ranjit Singh's, post-Ranjit Singh's Raj, right to the Khalistan Sangharsh, right to the present day with Deep, is that once you move into this spectrum, you do realize that everything is now secondary. Because none of this is actually a reality for us. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you have significant things that the Guru has given you. And in that becomes like things like, as in like you have Akal Di Bani, you have at the end of the day Akal Da Takht, you have in and of itself Akal Di Fauj, and they have like nothing. And then when what do they have? Like Gurbani even says, Baru ki peet jaise Basuda ka Raj hai. Like as in their Raj is like mitti diyan kanda, like walls of sand. That's all it is. That's what Dunyavi Raj of theirs is right now, because it's built on chut. It's built on vad. It's built on like nafrat. So it's like if you have all those things given by the Guru, it's like your mechanisms of how you engage with them is laid out by the Guru as well. We don't need to go any further than that. But to say, when you state at the very beginning what your limits are in a war, there's a problem. There's a huge problem when you dictate the terms of your own sangarsh based on what certain segments of society or politics are determining is right or wrong. You can't state certain things the Guru has ordained you to do, commanded you to do, because they go against the narrative of the state that you might live in. And that's the pamburkusa, or the confusion we're all in, is that like, what choice of words can we use, or how can we, like, water this down? How can we kind of say this in a different way? But all of that reflects back into these nasalan that are coming, and they become weaker and weaker as we go. Like, as in, like, if you can't have a conversation standing on a street with 100 people watching you, and you have to pick and choose your words, even though you know that what you're going to state may impact you, but you're willing to do it anyways, then I think we're on the right path. And I firmly believe that's the thing that Deep was doing. And that's why there's such a cut right now, that as in, we've lost people in the last 15, 20 years. Don't get me wrong. We've lost a lot of Panthak Hastiyan. We've lost a lot of Gurmukh Pyare over the last 20 years. The reason this one is hitting so hard is because, one, it's on the youth side. That naujawan saw an individual that was just speaking firmly, openly, without fear, and now they don't see anyone else. Like, if you look at Punjab's like political atmosphere right now, like, who's the replacement? And that's where I think this outpouring of emotion is really coming from. And that's why the significance of this event is so large, is because we don't see anyone else. The entire Morcha proved that to us for a year and a half, that this was the only guy that brought Sikhi into the Galbat. That others that tried weren't getting enough traction, but the ability he had as a speaker, the knowledge he was acquiring, being able to connect everything back to Sikhi, and his audience, and I'll end it here, Sant Jarnail Singh's audience was always the Sikh Panth. Primary audience was always the Sikh Panth. The way he spoke was the way you would want to speak to your bache at the end of the day, because that was the way he spoke to us. Because once you infuse that type of anakin into someone, you don't lose it very easily. The thing Deep was doing was very similar. There's no direct comparison there, but he was an extension of that same soch that Sant Jarnail Singh was, of Guru Sahib's soch, of such. So when he spoke, it hit you hard, because it's like, that's the reality. Somebody's actually pointing out the reality, and they're actually pointing out the solution very openly, that it's azadi. Tusi galamiya, galami de vichon ekko cheez nikalni hai, oh azadi hai. Aaj le lo, kal nu le lo, shattar la ke maar ke le lo, shattar maar ke le lo. It's one way or the other. So I think that cut that we are experiencing is really coming from that space. There's a lot more to this conversation, but I'm going to stop here, because I'm sure others want to speak. And there's a lot of emotion in these conversations. But the one thing I said at the beginning, and I'll just reiterate it now, getting into conversations around Deep's shakshiyat, his place, who to compare him to, we need to stop that. We just leave it alone. There's no need at the end of the day. These are conversations that make no sense right now. The thing that makes sense right now is that take what he was saying, right? This idea of judgment, like, as in, like, and I'll give you an example. When Deep was alive, do you think he would have approved of a comparison to Sant Jarnail Singh while he was alive? Deep himself said it would have been like, "Tusi karde ki hai?" Like, sharm karo. The comparisons aren't needed. Deep is his own entity. Let him be his own entity. What he did in the last year and a half is a legacy of its own. It doesn't need to be compared to Sant Jarnail Singh, Baba Deep Singh, or anyone else, because they're all extensions of the same such. And that's how we have to frame this, is that this was another brother that came, that moved that soch forward, that was drirta dinar nirdar hoke. He spoke about the things that many of us are too scared to talk about openly. And he did it on that same tatti that was moving to finish him off. And that should be the context, is all we need to move his gal forward, which is actually Guru Sahib's gal. So I would implore us to have that conversation as to, like, in this kind of, like, call it a watershed moment, call it whatever. There's a lot of mayusi out there as well, as that, like, give it a month, it's all going to die down. It won't die down now. There's too many things that have happened in the last 10 years, 5 years, year and a half. This thing is just going to accelerate. The idea that at his funeral and at the subsequent program at Fatehgarh Sahib, right? Leadership can try as they might to do whatever they want. The general idea of Khalistan is everywhere. It's everywhere now. And it was during the Morcha as well. One thing in the Morcha, his death right now, people are like, is it above and beyond India to do that? And a year and a half, 2 years ago, a large segment of our own population would have been like, it's a road accident, and now everyone at least is thinking as in like, well, the year and a half that we spent dying on the streets of Delhi, is state bhi nahi sada hega, is sarkar bhi nahi sadi hegi, is raj bhi nahi sada hega. And in that, what they're saying is that we have a problem here, that we can't accept Deep's death being of natural causes. And even that getting into people's minds is very significant, because the relationship with the state has either been broken or strained to the point that it's not believable anymore, that we have a place in this country. And even that is enough of an acceleration to keep moving this forward. So his death will draw out a rapid scale of emotion, and then you might see it taper a bit. But the underlying anak that has been jagad in the Qawm is going to stay for a while. And our job as all of us here and beyond this, like small call, is just to move that soch forward. So I'll stop there, pass it back to Shamsher Singh, but there's got to be something here for us to kind of move forward on. And my thing that, if any of you have ever heard me speak before, is that until you go back to Gurmat, Gurvani, and Rahat as the knee to whatever we're going to do, everything else is like that Baru ki Peet. Like that is exactly what it'll be. We don't want to put up walls of sand in any type of Raj Stapti that we're moving towards. Or Gurmat Gyan vich na paduga. And it sounds very like Katha related, or like as in like philosophical. But our entire movement from Guru Sahib till now is based on this notion that you can't remove Sikhi from this equation. So if it starts getting dwindled down to a basic Sangharsh of Punjab's environmental rights and things like that, you'll be stuck within the political spectrum and box that they put you in for the last 40 years. That go and ask this person, go and ask the UN, go and ask here, go and ask there. Like that in and of itself is a problem. Is where the Khalsa kedi darte mangte ban pe baithe hai. And that we have to challenge as well. This idea of state politics, of venturing into whether votes and things like that, when you have no other recourse, people think that that you have enough breathing room. And if you win a seat, you win 5, you win 10, maybe you make Punjab's government. Ultimately, anything you do will still keep you within the state's data. There's problems with even entering state-level politics when you have to sign on to believing in the Constitution of India to run in politics. For a Sikh at a moral and ethical level, it's very hard to even put pen to paper there, but you have to. So morally and ethically, there are dilemmas from the very beginning when you get into that type of politics. And those of our brothers and sisters that are in that type of politics, their intentions may be good. And I'm not taking anything away from anyone's intentions. I haven't done anything for the Panth that I can put on a platter and be like, Mirya dekho, jede jor la rahe, yeah, it's good. Like, as in, like, I don't take anything away from anyone. But I do have one thing to say there. Like, as in, like, there's a quote out here in the West that, as in, like, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Sometimes your intentions are fantastic, but the detriment of those intentions is felt for years afterwards in a very subtle but, like, actually firm way. So whatever politics we engage in, if it doesn't fit within the Sikh spectrum, it doesn't work. It shouldn't work. And we shouldn't be actually engaging in it. The tough questions for us, which face us regularly, are then what do we do? And most of us don't want to openly say what it is we should do. But we all know what it is. And I don't think we need to have a conversation beyond that on this call, but we know in our heart of hearts what it's going to take to separate from that country. And if that isn't your politics, you might be in the wrong room. But the politics of this conversation is just that. How do we remove ourselves from that situation And Khalistan is the first step towards a much bigger idea and concept of Padshahi and Khalsa. But it will go through Khalistan to go get there, just because of this environment we're in. So I'll stop there. I'll turn it back to Sanjay Singh. Thank you for like the few minutes that I had to kind of even engage, and then I'm happy to involve myself in the discussion coming. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Yeah, I guess like just to throw it back to you, yesterday we had the Shahidi of Bhai Navneet Singh Kadia, and it had me thinking, you know, Bhai Navneet Singh, you know, like if Deep was, you know, born in that time, right? Bhai Navneet Singh was someone who went to an engineering college. You know, he graduated. He went to Karnataka. And at that time, you know, he was a student. He was born to a Gursikh family. He was awoken when he saw the reality of Hindu fascism. And even today, like, you know, in Karnataka, there's, you know, right-wing Hindu leaders that are giving, you know, speeches about like their anti-Muslim rhetoric. There's a whole, you know, conversation. Well, it's not a conversation. It's basically, you know, nationalist violence that's directed towards the hijab. You know, there's a Sikh student that was refused admission into a college. So Navneet Singh in like the early 80s is studying in Karnataka. And you know wakes up to these realities when there's an attack on the university. You know, himself and a few other Sikhs pick up their karpana. They, you know, fight off this mob of Hindu fascists. And after that moment, Navneet Singh moves back to Punjab to Guru Nanak College, completes his education, and then while he's in that moment, he sees the continuing violence of the state against Sikhs. You know, people are getting arrested, people are getting tortured, people are getting killed. And in that moment, he decides to join the Khalistan Liberation Force. And it's important, you know, this connection, because Bhai Gurjant Singh was the Jathedar at the time of the Khalistan Liberation Force. And as we all should know, Bhai Gurjant Singh is one of the people that Sandeep Singh named as one of his inspirations, somebody that he looked up to. In fact, a post that he put on Facebook caused like so much controversy in the Indian media. So when, you know, Sikhs see that type of zulm and they wake in that moment, you know, and at that time there was a Hatiyar Band Sangharsh, there was a large scale armed struggle that was going on. For me, like if we were to name this hope that we see from Deep, it was this hope that he would revive that type of movement, that type of organizing in Punjab in this moment. If he had remained alive beyond, you know, the 15th of February this year, if he had carried on, you know, it would have been interesting to see, you know, how that kind of evolves. And I guess that brings, like, you know, to this question of this connection between Khalistan and Deep Sidhu. And what does that mean for us? And also it's related, you know, just going off what you were saying, it's related to these questions of justice. What is justice for Sandeep Singh? You know, is it what people have been saying, an inquiry into his death, and, you know, the government, you know, should tell us something? And if, you know, people, you know, refuse that, what else does justice look like, I guess? So just this connection between, you know, Sandeep Singh and Khalistan, and this question about justice by Maninder Singh, and then we can open it up to anybody else that wants to comment or say anything.
If you just take that last part, I don't know what an inquiry would do for people, and what we would believe in the inquiry or not. And the need for an inquiry, like as in like, do we like as in I would actually, I don't need one. Like I'll be more blunt, I guess, like as in I don't need an inquiry. In my mind, I know what happened. I really don't care what the state's narrative is. I don't care if they're going to put beer bottles in his car. I don't care if they're going to be like, you know, he's driving too fast and this is why he died. I don't care what they're going to do with the other people in the vehicle. I don't care what witnesses they show us. Why would we believe it? Like, how could we believe it? Like our relationship with the state over the last 40 years, especially, but since it's come into its kind of like hold in like the 1947, there's no trust into anything the biggest question for us is that, is it beyond them to actually do this? And the answer is like, no, they absolutely could do this. And then after that, it turns into more of this conversation as in like, well, why him? Well, basically because, in my opinion, is that no one was going to get this large of a following this quickly. And people will bring up his celebrity status in a negative way. Like, and I've heard that a lot, that as in the only reason he was so popular is because he was a celebrity. And to me, that's not true. The idea that it's going to be, he's a celebrity and that's the only reason people follow him. I've never heard a celebrity or somebody that's a movie kind of actor or anything like that, or a singer, speak the way he spoke in the last year and a half. Like, show me another one. I don't know where Diljit is right now. I don't know where anyone else is. And that's about the only two or three I know anyways, because I don't really listen to them. But where are they? Have they spoken like this? Have they done anything about this caliber? Flip it around the other way, which is the actual sick narrative, is that this guy left everything behind to speak this way. The moment he started speaking this way, he knew everything was finished. His career was finished. His popularity was finished in the Indian side. Everything was done. And he had to give everything up to kind of walk on this path and speak the way he spoke. So if the state is going to change that legacy into something that was like, oh, it was a natural death, or a death that was his own fault in some ways, or this, that, and the other, I don't want to listen to it. Like, there's like I spoke about this last week when I said that, in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, KPS Gill had a statement where he said that there is nobody that's being disappeared. What are these idiots talking about? Literally, it was the idea that as in there's nobody disappearing here. There's no Monday that are dying. This is all a lie. There's a few of these terrorists running around. We're like catching them, and we're kind of like reforming them, not even killing them. And it was just this odd interview where he literally ended by saying that all these people that these families and then they're bringing up to you, they're all sitting in the foreign countries. They're all enjoying themselves in lavish lifestyles living out there, that nothing is happening in Punjab. Anybody on this call, or generally within the Pantha now, just because of how the narrative around the state has changed over the last 20, 30 years, anybody believe KPS Gill? Like, do we believe him? Even an ounce of what that would come out of that moron's mouth? I don't think so. So what about the KPSs of today? These are just extensions. KPS Gill is an extension of like the Indian state. Because there's nothing more to it. That Brahmanical Hindutva type policy, whether it's the Congress, the BJP, or whoever, the underlying tone of a Hindu majoritarian state that turns on minorities whenever it feels like it, and the so-called like not everyone's bad, but the majority is just going to stay silent and be complicit in that way, it's bullshit. It's absolute BS. So the idea that some police officer sitting near Delhi is going to tell us that, no, he died of natural causes and we're going to believe it, I don't understand why, how. And if they do an inquiry and they have this like public record and they're like, yeah, this is what we found, would we buy into it? These are like, those just make some noise, try to do something, because we don't know what to do. Like, people are like, go to the UN and make them do an investigation. Oh, because the UN is awesome, right? Like, they've done a lot of good over the last 65, 70 years. Like, what ask do we have? The idea is to, and this is going to sound bad, but I'm a part of this. I accept that I'm fully a part of this. This is my kamjori as well. The idea is to pass the buck, is essentially what's happening. Is that I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to use the sick praxis of response to go and do something to right this wrong. Therefore, let's go back into the state and its machinery, and we'll just do like, hey, do an inquiry here. Hey, the UN should do an inquiry 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now. There's no closure. The Panth needs to close the conversation. We know what happened. We don't care what the state says. We don't put it past them to do these things now, in the past, in the future. These things will continue to happen because we're gulams. And that slave mentality, as they can like move you aside whenever they want, and they know that all you're going to do is come back within their own machinery and try to fight them in their own judiciary and lose eventually anyways. Like, tomorrow there's going to be a narrative that nobody was raped on the streets of Delhi during '84. Like, that wasn't state sponsored either, according to them. Do we believe it? So my question, always going back into the state apparatus, will always be, is that for what reason do we want to go back into the state apparatus? What reason do we have to engage their political machinery? And what reason do we think that their judiciary is going to offer us anything that they haven't offered us over the last 75 years? And that reason will always be people like me or too kamjor to go and do what they're supposed to do. And that's it. Because there was never an idea of seeking justice versus the cause of delivering justice. And it sounds so cool when people put it out there. But actually being able to carry that out is a problem for us now, because we've bought into the state narratives, whether we're in the diaspora or in Punjab. Punjab's reality is very different. And Punjab's reality is like, you speak too much, you go to jail. You read books and you go to jail. There's a lot of things that happen there, and we have to be cognizant of the reality they live in and the privilege we have of living in these Western countries and speaking this way. But we still need to speak this way. And they're more for us and I would call them lanta, they're reminders for all of us, including me. Our brothers and sisters in Punjab have a very different reality than the one we have here. And constantly being cognizant of that and letting them move and giving them the support they need to be standing out there, and they can do those things. Because we can do things out here and speak this way. They can't in most cases. But they can do things on the ground we can't even imagine. And the risks they take by even joining protests or going out into the streets or clashing with police are things that we've never done. So there's a relationship there that in the future I think needs to be dissected as well, as to how we see youth in Punjab and how the naujawan of Punjab see us out here. But I think just to that point, as to the relationship with Khalistan, and I'll stop here, the relationship to Khalistan with Deep is just too clear. Like, well, once he started speaking about Gulami and Azadi is the only hal, then that's just Khalistan. Oda nahi Khalistan right now. And he was clear about that. Even on the stage on January 25th, before they went on January 26th, like, he was the one who spoke about Khalistan when no one would do it. And that's that 1 6-10 second clip that everyone's been passing around. Like, that in that mahal was one of the most difficult things to say, because nobody would. The first person to come through the door, it's always the toughest for them. Like what Guru Nanak Sahib did was the toughest. Regardless of 14 wars in Guru Gobind Singh's period, Guru Nanak had to lay a foundation. And Guru Nanak had to walk through every door as the first. Whether it was clashing on caste-based issues, gender-based issues, dharam issues, access issues, parity issues, equality issues, whatever it was, Guru Nanak went first. And that's the most difficult thing to do. And in these situations, Deep was going first, because no other politician, no other siyasi leader was showing clarity. And that's the respect that we have for him, because he was first through the door. If it was January Shabbi, nobody else went. He was there. He was on the Qila. He was doing Jagade. He was right there with everyone. He was putting himself on the line every step of the way. And it kept accelerating all the way up until his death. So I think the relationship between him and Sikh sovereignty is unquestionable at this stage.
Yeah, and we see this constant targeting of the, just like a comment I want to make just of something that you were saying. We see this constant targeting for Deep, like throughout, right? Like from the Lal Killa to to even before that, like when he did that Barka Dutt interview, the whole Lal Killa thing was completely blamed on him as one individual. And then, even after that, right, like, he was put on that radical edge. But yeah, I want to go to Nawabi Ben next. Benji, like, just feel free to say whatever you want to say, but just a question to get you started. Like, it's been like on das ka din tote ho gaya. Like, how do you think about Deep in this moment? What are you thinking? What do you think about this question of, like, honoring Deep in this moment, and the questions around justice and Khalistan and everything? But feel free.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਵੈਸੇ ਤਾਂ ਮਨਿੰਦਰ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਬੜੇ ਹੀ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਕਿਹਾ। ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾਤਰ ਕਰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਗੱਲ, ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੀ ਹਾਂ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵੀਰ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਝਲਕ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਹੋਰ ਦੇਖੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਹੀ ਵਾਰ ਦੇਖੀ ਆ। ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਝਲਕ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਤੇ 10 ਦਿਨ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਤਾਂ ਵੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਵੇਂ ਲੱਗੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕੱਲ ਹੀ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਇਆ, ਵੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਾਈ ਡਿਡ ਇਟ ਹਿਟ ਸੋ ਹਾਰਡ। ਇਹ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਬੜਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਰੇਂਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੇਖਿਆ। ਬੜਾ ਹੀ ਸੋਹਣਾ, ਬੜਾ ਹੀ ਜੈਨੂਇਨ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ। ਤੇ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਕਾਹਤੋਂ? ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਰਾ ਉਹਦਾ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਅਰਾਊਂਡ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਰਾਜ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਹੋਇਆ, ਤਾਂ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ। ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਬਥੇਰੇ ਲੋਕੀ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਦੇ ਆ, ਬੁਲਾਰੇ ਤੱਕ ਵੀ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਇੰਨਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਤੇ ਜੈਨੂਇਨ ਤਾਂ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖਦੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਕਦਰ ਅੰਦਰ ਚਿਣਗ ਲੱਗ ਜੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਵੇਂ ਲੱਗਣ ਲੱਗ ਜੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੁਛ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਈਵਨ though ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੰਨਾ ਕੁਛ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਮੇਰੇ 'ਚ ਇੰਨੀਆਂ ਕਮੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੂਹਰੇ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਕਿ ਦੇਖੋ ਮੇਰੇ 'ਚ ਕਮੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਕੁੱਕਰ ਆਂ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਭੌਂਕਣਾ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਇਹ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਐਵੇਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੋ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਆ ਗਏ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ ਮੂਹਰੇ ਨਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਹਨਾ। ਐਵੇਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੋ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨਾ ਚਲਾਈਏ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਰਿਸਕ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਵੀ ਹਜੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਜਰਨੀ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਸਿੱਖਦੇ ਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਇੰਨਾ ਚਟਾਨ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਖੜ ਜਾਣਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਮੂਹਰੇ, ਤਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਬੜਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਸਫ਼ਰ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਛ ਅਲਟੀਮੇਟਲੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਸ ਦਿਨ ਚਿਖਾ ਦੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ, ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਹੈ, ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ, ਹਨਾ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੰਨਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਚੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮਿਲਿਆ। ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸ਼ੰਭੂ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਸੁਣੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਸਾਰੇ ਵਰਤਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੌਮੀਅਤ ਦਾ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਇੰਨੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੱਖ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦਿਸ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੈਂ ਕਦੇ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ, ਹਨਾ। ਤੇ ਉਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਕੌਮੀਅਤ ਦਾ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਐਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੱਖ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਚੁੱਕਿਆ ਕਿ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਨੀਗੀ, ਤੇ ਨਾ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਕਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਤੇ ਨਾ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇੱਕ ਪੂਰੀ ਕੰਧ ਬਣ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਕੰਪਰੋਮਾਈਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿਖ ਰਿਹਾ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਹਨਾ। ਭਾਵੇਂ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸਾਂ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੇਨ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਅੰਦਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਆ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਆ ਤੇ ਆ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਆ, ਤੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਕੋਈ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਆ, ਹਨਾ। ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਿ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਉੱਭਰ ਕੇ ਆਈ ਆ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉੱਭਰ ਕੇ ਆਉਣੀ ਵੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਸੀ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ। ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਉਟ ਪਟਾਂਗ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਹੋਈ ਜਾਵੇ, ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਮਾਇਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰੱਖਦੀ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਬੜੀ ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਟਰਮ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ, ਉਹ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ। ਰਹਿਣੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਆਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਗਾਇਆ, ਪਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਤੇ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿਗਨੀਫੀਕੈਂਟ ਨਿਕਲੀ ਕਿ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਲਈ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਹੱਲ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੌਮੀ ਘਰ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ, ਹੋਰ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੇ ਮਾੜੀ ਜੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਬੇਸਲਾਈਨ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੀ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਡੂੰਘੀ ਹੋਵੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਐਵੇਂ ਵੀ ਸੋਚਣਾ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਬਈ ਉਹ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਹੱਕ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਹੱਕ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਆ, ਦੈਟਸ ਇਟ। ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਇੰਨੀ ਇੱਕ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਵੇ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਉਹ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੂਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਦਾ ਵਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਤੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀਆਂ ਬਾਈਨਰੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਉਣਾ ਹੋ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ। ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੀ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਹੋਵੇ, ਉਹਦੇ ਚੋਂ ਪੱਖ ਬਸ ਇੱਕ ਨਿਕਲਦਾ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ, ਹਨਾ। ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ। ਇਹੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਹੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਆ, ਇੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਉਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਇਹ ਚ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਆ, ਇਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਖਾਸ ਬਣਾਉਂਦੀ ਆ, ਇਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਜਜ਼ਬਾਤੀ ਬਣਾਉਂਦੀ ਆ, ਹਨਾ। ਤੇ ਇਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਫਿਰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਆ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਰੇ ਵਿਰਾਗ ਚ ਨੇ, ਪਰ ਬੜੀ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਕਦੋਂ 7-8 ਲੱਖ ਦਾ ਇਕੱਠ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕੇਸਰੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਿਤੇ। ਤੇ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ, ਵਿਰਾਗ ਚੋਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਕੁਛ ਨਾ ਕੁਛ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਨਿਕਲਦਾ, ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਸ ਵਾਰ ਵੀ ਉਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਨਿਕਲਦਾ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਆ। ਤੇ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤੀ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਉਹ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਤਾਂਘ ਦਾ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਆ, ਤੇ ਜਿਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਵਰਤਾਰਾ ਦੇਖ ਸਕੇ। ਹਾਂਜੀ।
That was just so beautiful, Benji. Thank you so much. I think Jaideep Singh messaged he wants to say something.
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਦੇਖੀ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਭਿੰਡਰਾਂ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਨੇ, ਦੀਪ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਨਾਲ ਦੇਖੀ ਹੈ ਗੱਲ, ਵੀ ਲੋਕ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਿਉਂਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਵਾ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਗਦਾਰ ਆ, ਫਲਾਣਾ ਆ ਵਾ, ਫਲਾਣਾ ਉਹ ਵਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਦੋਂ ਫੇਰ ਲੋਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦੁਆਰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਓ। ਸਾਡੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਲੀਡਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਗਦਾਰ ਫਿਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੀ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਪਰ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਮੋਦੀ ਨਾਲ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਉਹ ਦਿੱਲੀ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਸਰੋਪੇ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ। ਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਰੋਪਾ ਵੇਚਿਆ ਹੀ ਹੋਇਆ, ਘਟਾਈ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵੇਚਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਰੋਪਾ, ਸੈਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਫਲਾਣੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਸਰੋਪੇ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਇੱਕ ਜਕਾਰੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਬਾਦਲ ਦੇ ਬਾਦਲ ਟੀਚਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਮਾਰਿਆ ਬਾਦਲ ਕੁਛ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵਾ ਜਕਾਰਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਬਾਦਲ ਦੇਖੋ ਕੁਰਸੀ ਤੇ ਭੁੱਖਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਉਹ। ਤੇ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਆਊਗਾ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਏਕਤਾ ਬਣਾਈਏ। ਜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਏਕਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆਊਗਾ? ਇਹਨਾਂ ਹੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਸੀ ਬਸ।
ਨਹੀਂ, ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕਾਫੀ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਆ ਪ੍ਰਚਲਿਤ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਹੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਕਦਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕਦਰ ਪਾਉਣ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਪਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਮਨਿੰਦਰ ਵੀਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ, ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਉਹੀ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਆ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅਗੇਨ ਕੋਈ ਤੁਲਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਇਹ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਉਹੀ ਸੱਚ ਦੀ ਝਲਕ ਉਵੇਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਮਾਛੀਵਾੜੇ ਦੇ ਜੰਗਲ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ, ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਦੇਖਣੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਨੇ, ਹਨਾ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੱਕ, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ, ਉਹੀ ਪਰਖ ਦੀ ਘੜੀ ਆ। ਜਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਲੱਗੇ ਕਿ ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜਾਣ ਬੁੱਝ ਕੇ ਹਮਲਾ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ, ਇਹ ਵੋ, ਹਨਾ। ਤੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਚੋਂ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ ਲੋਕੀ ਹੋਰ ਪਿਆਰ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਪ੍ਰਚਲਿਤ ਨੈਰੇਟਿਵ ਇਹ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਲਾਲ ਕਿਲੇ ਵਾਲੀ ਘਟਨਾ ਵੇਲੇ ਇਹ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਜਾਣਬੁੱਝ ਕੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਗਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਵਾਇਲੈਂਸ ਹੋ ਗਈ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਜਿਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਸਿੰਗਲ ਆਊਟ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਸੋਚੋ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਮੇਬੀ ਉਸ ਵੀਰ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਵਾਪਰੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਕੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਇੰਨੇ ਪ੍ਰਤੱਖ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇੰਨੇ ਜਜ਼ਬੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜਲਾਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉੱਭਰਨਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਤੇ ਕੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਸਿੱਖਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਇੱਕ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਆ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਦਾ, ਇੱਕ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਲਰਨਿੰਗ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਆ। ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਉਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਉੱਭਰ ਕੇ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹੀ ਨਾ ਜੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਨਾ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਭਾਣੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ, ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਦੁਖੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਫਰਸਟ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਗਲਤ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ। ਨਾ, ਬਸ ਇਹ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੰਥ ਆ, ਉਹਨੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ ਮਾਛੀਵਾੜੇ ਦੇ ਜੰਗਲ ਦੇਖਣੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਚੋਂ ਹੋਰ ਉੱਭਰ ਕੇ ਹੋਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੇ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਆ। ਬਾਕੀ ਮਨਿੰਦਰ ਵੀਰ ਜਾਂ ਸ਼ਮਸ਼ੇਰ ਵੀਰ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਵਧੀਆ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਮਝਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ।
ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਵਧੀਆ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ, ਬਟ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਦੋ ਪੱਖ ਵੀ ਰੱਖ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਵਿੱਚ। ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਯਾਰ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਅੰਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੀ ਖੇਡ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹੀ ਲੋਕ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ, ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਸੌਣ ਜੋਗੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਭਾਈ ਤਾਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਆਂ, ਭਾਈ ਮਨੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਆਂ, ਬਾਬਾ ਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਖੀਆਂ ਸੁਣਾਉਣੀਆਂ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਣ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹੀ ਬੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਖਿੱਚਣਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਨਾ ਜਾਓ। ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਦਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਈ ਗਈ, ਤੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਕਦਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਈ ਗਈ, ਇਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸੱਚ ਹੈ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੀ ਖੇਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਚਾਅ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆ, ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ਰਵੇਸ਼ਨ ਆਫ ਲਾਈਫ, ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਸੁਪਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹ ਹਕੀਕਤ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ। ਤੇ ਇਹ ਪੁੱਠਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਸੋਚਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ ਹਾਂ। ਜੋ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਪਨੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਉਸ ਸੰਸਾਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਦੱਸੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੈਗਾ ਹੈ ਝੂਠ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਝੂਠ ਨੂੰ ਸੱਚ ਮੰਨ ਲਿਆ ਹੈ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਝੂਠ ਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਸੱਚ ਮੰਨ ਲਿਆ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੀਜ਼ਰਵ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਕਟ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ, ਉਹਦੀ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਰੱਖਣ ਲਈ, ਸੁਰੱਖਿਅਤ ਰੱਖਣ ਲਈ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਏਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿ ਇਹ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਆ, ਇਹ ਘਰ ਵੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਆ, ਇਹ ਧਰਤੀ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਆ, ਇਹ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆ ਇੱਕ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਕਨੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਬਣ ਗਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਇੱਕ ਓਵਰਸਾਈਟ ਬਣ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੇਰਾ ਆ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਛੱਡਣਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਔਖਾ ਆ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਮੰਨੀਏ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਮੰਨੀਏ, it creates a state of confusion but also fear। ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਂਝ ਨਾਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਦੀਪ ਭਾਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੀ ਜਾਲ 'ਚ ਫਸੇ ਆ ਬਹੁਤ ਡੂੰਘੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ, ਬਹੁਤ ਡੂੰਘੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੀ ਜਾਲ 'ਚ ਫਸੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਮਨ ਘਬਰਾਉਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਰਵਾ ਦੇਣਾ। ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੂੰਗਾ, ਇਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਮਨ 'ਚ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਘਰ ਆ, ਮੇਰਾ ਕੰਮ ਆ, ਮੇਰੀ ਜੌਬ ਆ, ਮੇਰਾ ਕਰੀਅਰ ਆ, ਜੋ ਵੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਬੀਬੀ ਨੇ ਖਤਰਾ ਹੁਣ ਬਣ ਕੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਹੈ। ਕਿ ਲਾਈਕ ਮੇਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਆ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਸ਼ਿਫਟ ਹੋਊਗੀ, ਜਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਫ਼ ਹੋ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਪੰਥ ਦਾ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹਾਂ, ਜਾਂ ਦੂਜੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਬਚਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਮੈਂ ਉਸੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਟੈਕ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਦੀਪ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕਿ ਇਹ ਬੰਦੇ ਗਲਤ ਆ, ਇਹ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗਲਤ ਰਾਹ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਆ, ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਮੇਰੀਆਂ ਨਿੱਜੀ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀਆਂ ਆ ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਸੇ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਹੈ। And this has been the reality for the last like 4 decades at least. Anyone who comes forward with these types of politics is immediately sidelined while they're alive, because they present a danger to the way of life that we've adopted in the West especially, but also in Punjab as well. And that's infused in Maya, in materialism, consumerism, capitalism, lots of isms there. But as in, like, There's a set way that we're looking at this, and that's why we can't get out of it. Otherwise, there's nothing that would stop us to celebrating these types of individuals while they were still alive. ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਦਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਛੱਡਣ ਲਈ ਤਿਆਰ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਪੰਥ ਨੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਪੰਥ ਨੇ ਤੈਅ ਕਰਨਾ ਸਹੀ ਜਾਂ ਗਲਤ and I think that's really important. ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ like as in like ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚ ਆਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਭੈ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਭੈ ਨੂੰ ਆਫਟਨ ਡਰ ਮੰਨਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਡਰ ਤੇ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੌਤ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਰ ਆ ਉਹ ਦੂਰ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਸਕੇ ਮਨ ਮੈਂ ਪੈ ਗੁਰੂ ਜਿਸਕੇ ਮਨ ਮੈਂ ਪੈ ਗੁਰੂ ਤਿਸ ਪੈ ਜਮ ਕੋ ਨਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਭੈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਮਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਾਂ ਮੌਤ ਦੀ ਡਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦੂਰ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਗੱਲ ਵੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤਰਸਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਸਕੇ ਹੱਥ ਮਸ਼ਾਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੱਚ ਦਾ ਮਸ਼ਾਲ is like a torch ਸੱਚ ਦਾ torch ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆ the truth ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਰੂਗਾ ਅੰਧੇਰੋਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੈ then what can darkness do to that individual ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਰ ਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਡਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਬਿੰਸ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਚਲੇ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ then all these things become more clear ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਦਰ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੀ ਜਿਉਂਦੀ ਜੀ ਹੋ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ that's why I said at the very beginning that ਜੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਧਰਮ ਦਾ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਾਣੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਰਹਿਤ ਆ ਤੇ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਬਹਿਣੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਪਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਬੀਬੀਆਂ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ they will constantly be seen as threats to our own existence because our politics and our siyasat and our dharma hasn't gone far enough to actually see them as beneficial. We'll see them as problems. And the problem is because we're still infused in Maya. And you have to have that conversation. I've said it in many political spaces in the past as well. Our politics is very different than the rest of the world. We are essentially just totally different than anyone else. And that's neither good or bad for people, but for us, it's beautiful. That we don't have to compare ourselves to Palestinians or Kashmiris or others. Struggles may have similarities amongst them, but our struggle is driven by dharma. Our struggle is completely different. Its roop rekha, its daira that it's within is completely different. So ਕਦਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗੀ ਲੱਗੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਭਾਜੀ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਕਦਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਤੇ ਕਦਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਸੀਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ just I'm sorry like as in like ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਤੇ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾਈ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਵਧਾਵੇ ਦੇ ਕੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਸੇ ਵੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਇਆ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਵੱਡੀ ਘਟਨਾ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਡਰ ਆ ਉਹ ਬੀੜ ਰਸਤੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਦਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਫੇਰ ਤੁਰ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ I think that happens from periodically from time to time ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ I'll end here ਜਿਹੜੇ ਛੋਟੇ ਘੱਲੂਘਾਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਦਿਲ 'ਚ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ how quickly they realized what their situation was ਕਿ ਉਹ ਜੋ ਛੋਟੇ ਘੱਲੂਘਾਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਹੋਣੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਪੰਥ ਪ੍ਰਕਾਸ਼ ਦੇ ਦਰਜ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਨਿਕਸ ਜਿਹੇ ਰਾਜ ਲਏ ਮਰੇ ਗੁਰਪੁਰ ਜਾਏ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਘੇਰੇ 'ਚੋਂ ਹੁਣ ਨਿਕਲ ਆਇਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਹੈ ਘੇਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਰ ਗਏ ਆ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਕੋਲ ਜਾਣਾ ਹੀ ਆ ਪਰ ਇਹੀ ਰਹਿ ਗਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਰਾਜ ਲਵੋ ਜਾਂ ਮਰਨ ਦੀ ਤਿਆਰੀ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਜਾਣ ਲਈ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਚਾਲੇ ਹੁਣ ਕੁਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ and I think we're in a very similar situation in today's time as well ਕਿ ਰਾਜ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਰਾਜ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਚੱਲਣੀਆਂ
Thank you so much, Baji. Can we go to Paneet Kaur and then Mandeep Singh?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I just wanted to add something to what Maninder Viji said. I just wanted to share my own experience. Like he said, कि मैं मतलब जिਵੇਂ ਸਾਡੇ parents ਉਹੀ ਹੈ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ who inculcated Sikh in us, right? Like ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ bedtime stories ਸੁਣੀਆਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਚਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬਜ਼ਾਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਜੋ ਵੀ but ਹੁਣ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ I'm an international student here studying at UBC they for example I try to write articles or speak about it and then they are the ones who would say ਮਤਲਬ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਖਿੱਚਦੇ ਆ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਨਾ ਬੋਲੋ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਡਰ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਨਾ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਨਾ ਬੋਲੋ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦੀ ਵੀ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ reach a point, reach a point where you get heard or, read, educate yourself, get to a point. I get it, but like ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਸਭ ਭਰਿਆ ਪਿਆ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਸ ਏਜ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਭਾਵਨਾਵਾਂ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਲੜਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿਖਾਈਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਇੱਕ ਵੇਲੇ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਉਹੀ ਨੇ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਫਾਦਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ he was like really he was the one who gave me all the books ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ but now he is the one who is like no don't speak ਸੋ ਮਤਲਬ ਮੈਂ ਉਸੇ ਜਾਣਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮਤਲਬ ਆਪਾਂ ਐਵੇਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਸਮਝਾਈਏ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੋਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਪੱਖ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਰੱਖੀਏ
ਇਹ ਔਖਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਆ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਲਾਈਕ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਧੱਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਗਾਂਹ ਤੁਰਨਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ ਲਾਈਕ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਪਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਮੋਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪਿਆਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਉਹ ਛੱਡਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਭਰਪੂਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਲਵੀਰ ਦੀ ਸਪੀਚ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕਈ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਹਰੇਕ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਹੋਵੇ ਪਰ ਕਈ ਆ ਕਲਗੀਆਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੰਗ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਵਰਗੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪ ਵੀ ਜੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਹੋਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਪਰ ਆਪ ਮਾਪਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੁਰਨ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਚੱਲੀਏ ਇਹ ਲੰਬੇ ਪੈਂਡੇ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਹੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਈਏ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਬਾਰੇ ਇਹ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਆ ਇਹ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਦਾ ਸਾਂਝ ਭਰ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਗਾਂਹ ਤੁਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ I hope that helps Benji but it's difficult ਕਿ ਮਾਪਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮੋਹ ਪਿਆਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਪਰ ਜੋ ਸਹੀ ਆ ਜੋ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਮਨਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਤਿਆਗ ਵਾਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਮੋਹ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਮੋਹ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਉੱਠਣਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਅੱਗੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਨੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੀ ਸਹਾਰਾ ਦੇਣਾ ਆ ਮਨਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ just to touch upon a little bit of what Bhai Maninder Singh said, I'm going to read a part of a shabd here. Guru Ramdas ji ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਕਰ ਪਾਲੀਏ ਵੰਜਾਰਿਆ ਮਿੱਤਰਾ ਲੈ ਮਾਤ ਪਿਤਾ ਗਲ ਲਾਏ ਲਾਵੇ ਮਾਤ ਪਿਤਾ ਸਦਾ ਗਲ ਸੇਤੀ ਮਨ ਜਾਣੇ ਖਟ ਖਵਾਏ ਜੋ ਦੇਵੈ ਤਿਸੇ ਨ ਜਾਣੇ ਮੂੜਾ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਨੂੰ ਲਪਟਾਏ ਕੋਈ ਗੁਰਮੁਖ ਹੋਵੇ ਸੋ ਕਰੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਹਰ ਧਿਆਵੇ ਮਨ ਲਿਵ ਲਾਏ So I guess I can read the English translation here as well. Essentially, this is talking about duality, right? Our parents, actually anybody in this world, right? When you're born, mother and father hug you close. They claim he is mine, he's mine. So the child is brought up this way. They believe that you'll provide for them, support for them. The fool does not know the one who gives. Instead, he clings to the gift. Where is the Gurmukh who reflects upon, meditates upon, to the Lord? So with this, like, ਆਪਾਂ ਦੀਪ ਵੀਰ ਨਾਲ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੀਏ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਮਝੀਏ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਥੋੜਾ ਜ਼ੂਮ ਆਊਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੋ ਸਾਰਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ ਭਾਣਾ ਆ ਰਾਈਟ ਇਹ ਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਦੀਪ ਦੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਆਏ ਆ ਬਹੁਤ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਆ ਕੋਈ ਏਦਾਂ ਜੇਲ੍ਹਾਂ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਹਨਾ ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ as we move forward our focus needs to be, as everybody has been saying, is on what Deep was saying, right? These conversations of what happened, who did what, like all that stuff is going to go on, right? But what are you going to do? You're here. There's how many of us? 37 of us here, right? Bhai Maninder Singh again had mentioned the Khalsa has always been the minority, right? But you got to understand that you are not a minority. You are a nation. There's people all over this world that are with you, right? So how are you going to awaken those around you, those that are sleeping around you? Not their fault, right? ਇਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਰਮਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਆ ਹਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੇ ਫਰੈਂਡਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਜੋੜਨਾ ਆ are you only going to do it ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ 100 200 300 ਜਣੇ ਆਡੀਅנס ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਦੋਂ 1-2 ਜਣੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਜੋੜਨਾ ਆ, ਰਾਈਟ। ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਰਿਸਪੌਂਸਿਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਆ। ਜੋ ਦੀਪ ਵੀਰ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਇਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ, ਡਟ ਕੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ, ਹਨਾ, ਇਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਉਣੀ ਆ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਆ। ਮੇਬੀ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਟਾਈਮ ਵੀ ਮਾਇਨਾ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫਲ ਆ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਬੀਜ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦਰਖਤ, ਹਨਾ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰੁੱਖ ਆ, ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਛਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਦੇਖਣੀ ਆ। That's all. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
Feel free if anyone wants to say any final comments, and then we can hear from Nawabi Benji in closing. I know they want to share something with everyone that's here today. But if anyone wants to add a couple of final comments, and we can wrap up in the next few minutes. But for me, it's just, I'll drop some links in the chat. This is a very long struggle that we're engaged in. And that's something that we have to think about, and that's something that we have to build towards. And like I was saying in the start, we got to think about how we're building our movement and how we're sustaining our movement, and political education is so important to that. There's a space here, as Mandeep Singh said, we're a calm, we're all interconnected. And we have to look to that space, especially in these moments, like more people are speaking about Khalistan. But this is a movement space, and that movement space demands that you inform yourself about it before you jump in and think that you're going to move something. There's a history of struggle here that's really important to how we move forward. But we can go to Brahmdeep Benji. She wants to say something.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on how, when we came to learn about Deep Sidhu's passing and what I felt. In the past year and a half with the Kisan Morcha, I feel like for me and a lot of youth my age, naujawan, the Kisan Morcha and seeing the rise of Deep Sidhu was one of our first experiences of witnessing historical events. Even when in 2015 we had Sabat Khalsa, the Bargadi Morcha, I felt like I was still too young to understand and fully grasp what was happening. To see how, and this was one of the first moments that we were able to actively participate and see history unfolding in front of us, and see how the opposition to the Sangharsh was so strong, and how the Kisan Morcha was constantly distanced from Khalistan and our Qawmi struggles, and how the Indian state actively exercised their oppressive power. And they used the same tactics that we have learned about historically and heard about, the same tactics used to villainize Khalistan, derail our cause, and just paint our narrative with their brush and not what we saw. And I feel like the most important thing that I learned from Bison Singh is that we need to remember him as he lived, and we know what happened, like Vijay have said time again, and that we know what happened, we know how the state acts, how it will continue to act with any leaders that come, or any Sikhs, even if you're just, the example of just, having books and, distributing books, even that is criminalized and Sikhs are put in jail for that. So we will see that we don't need to fear, like just like he didn't fear what would happen to him as he continued on his path, how as he learned and actively applied what he learned and tried to connect as many people as possible. His biggest thing was that he was able to connect, naujawan, but also he was able to connect the elders and people in Punjab, people from every band. They were able to feel what he felt, that he was deeply passionate about, Punjab, di Dharti, and what happens to the Sikh Qawm. And we need to just, remember that and see that as like a naujawan, like we need to remember that this is our moment to start, just like he started his journey. It's important for us to do the same and try to, look at who influenced him and look back, read, educate ourselves just like he did, and just go on from there. Dhanwad ji.
Thank you so much. We can go to Jaideep and then Maninder Singh.
And like just like Benji said, is that like ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਲੋਕ ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਬਾਈ ਤੇ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਪੈੜਾ ਦੇਾਂਗੇ ਠੋਕ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਜੇ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਊਗਾ like we can't like forget him like we should like I'm sorry but like the thing is that like we can't like forget him. We need to take his ideas and apply it and move on, because the only way to get Khalistan is if we listen to people like him. And that like we can't just simply forget him and say, oh, he just fought for us. No, we have to learn about him and apply his knowledge and be Glami
100%. And I just want to point you back to the entire generation of Sikhs, that Deep was inspired by. It's also important that we look at them in this moment as well, because this movement doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of Deep. It rests on shoulders of an entire generation. So that's why for me it constantly comes back to learning about the history and the politics of the struggle, the realities of the struggle. Otherwise we'll be constantly caught in this cycle of reaction. But Maninder Singh, do you want to wrap it up, and then we can hear from Nababi Benj?
Yeah, I had a couple of things actually. One was just based off of this the extension of the soch of like Guru Sahib to every movement beyond it, to Deep today. And Deep should be remembered. Deep will be something like Brahmdeep Kaur just said, that as in like for this generation, Deep is significant, very significant for all of us. Some of us got to see, like, I remember exactly where I was when Bhai Dilawar Singh's action happened. And I remember the Jakare around me, and I remember people hugging each other and crying when news broke that had happened. And we lived in a bit of a different world, because we're going on 40. Many of you weren't born at that time. You didn't see Bhai Jagtar Singh Hawara as like a 20-year-old being arrested. You didn't see Bhai Jagtar Singh Tara at that age. And they're icons now, but they're in jail, and the interaction with them is limited. So each generation will have individuals that come forward. And the same thing goes for Deep. That as in like generationally, people come forward, and he's come forward in this generation to kind of like spark something. And he sparked it. And just like Jaideep Singh said, is to keep that spark alive is that action is needed. There's actionable things that can happen. It can happen in our personal lives and in our Panthak lives. So we shouldn't forget that. Like, I did want to touch on this, because I saw a comment in the chat right now about, I was going to say something earlier about the issue with parents. Puneet Kaur had and I left it because we had moved on. But I'll give you an example of like my house, my home. I've been around Khalistani Sikhs since I was a child. Like, it's just been my whole life, my home, all around me. This has been the narrative. My dad used to quiz me, do things with me as I was growing up. My father gave me tiyari in one way, and my mother gave me tiyari in a different way. And to this day, my dad and mom are like, every day they see me, and they don't see me that often anymore, is ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਬਹਿ ਜਾ, ਰਹਿਣ ਦੇ, ਤੂੰ ਹੀ ਲੱਭਿਆ ਆ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਤੂੰ ਹੀ ਮੋਰੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਤੂੰ ਹੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਹੰਡਾਉਣਾ ਆ, ਤੂੰ ਹੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ, ਤੂੰ ਘਰ ਵੜਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ, 6 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਆ, 3 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਪਣੇ ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਆ, ਘਰ ਦਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੂੰ ਹੁਣ. And it's like, yeah, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਤਿਆਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ, ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਕੀ ਕਰਾਂ? ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਕੀੜਾ ਤਾਂ ਵੜ ਗਿਆ ਸਿਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਕੱਢਣਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਔਖਾ ਹੈ, ਹੁਣ ਕਰਾਂ ਕੀ? And that's the unfortunate thing that most of us go through, is that my parents still to this day, they emotionally outburst like this at me. And then when I go and sit with my dad, he'll be sitting on the couch, I'll sit in his feet, just because it's a relationship. That's what I've been doing as a kid with him. And then I'll just start talking to him. And then when I get serious with him, he's like, then he'll be like, how proud he is, how fakar hai. And then he'll say the one thing that Manpreet Singh, I think it was, that put it in the chat, that his life experiences won't allow him to do these things. And he's living his life right now, he says, through me. ਜਦੋਂ ਤੂੰ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੂੰ ਮੋਰਚਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ, he goes, ਮੈਥੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦਾ, he goes ਮੇਰੀਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀਆਂ ਆ and he goes ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀਆਂ ਸੀ he goes ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਤੇਰੇ 'ਚ ਨਾ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀਆਂ ਰਹਿਣ he goes ਤੇਰੇ 'ਚ ਥੋੜੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ he goes ਤੂੰ ਉਹ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ he goes ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਿਆਣੇ ਆ ਤੇਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਆ ਤੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰੂੰਗਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀਆਂ ਤੂੰ ਕੱਢੂੰਗਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂ ਗਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ that they're all going to be at the same level. And I completely agree with that idea that there's a very traumatic period that our parents went through. And many of them are just fearful. That doubt seeps in, it's natural. We living out here, we don't know what that doubt actually is. When your brother gets picked up and then they disappear, your father gets picked up and they disappear, any of those things, we don't know those things. Most of us don't. Some of us here might. I'm sorry if I offended anyone on that, but some will know. But most of us don't. So I wanted to clear that up as to like the idea shouldn't be looking at past generations as to why they don't allow us to move forward. It's natural. Breaking those bandishan though is up to us. There's so many of us in this room right now. Sanu tiyari sari mili hai. And then the idea now is that, like I said before, the same people jinne sanu tiyar kita ho sanu kitchen mein aunde hai. And really it's out of pyar. It's out of this taras. It's out of this idea that ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਲੇ ਛੋਟੇ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਉਮਰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਮੋਰੇ ਆ and then when you go back to them and say like as in ਜੇ ਸਾਰੀ ਉਮਰ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਥ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿਖੇ ਲੱਗਦੀ like you taught me this idea ਕਿ ਪੰਥ is first ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ and I believe I heard if I'm not wrong Paneet Kaur I think was at a program here at the Gurdwara over the last weekend. If it wasn't her I apologize but it sounded like the same voice. But I think it was she that said something along the lines of that as in like our parents keep telling us, especially bache from Punjab, that ਤੁਹਾਡਾ future ya ਤੁਹਾਡਾ future da socho and then she said that kada future ya sada. What future do we have? What am I protecting? Because is it my education, a position, a career? I won't get married in the future. Women in our community unfortunately have this huge thing against them as well. But like this Bibi that was at the Gurdwara laid this out so beautifully as in like, what do I have left? My parents see me as a liability because if I talk too much, and if I go back to Punjab, their fear is, and then when we think about it, like as in from our perspective, those ideas that we talk about are fantastic as ideas. The reality of them on the ground in Punjab is obviously very different, but it doesn't mean we don't talk about them. So I would say just on not just the parent side of this conversation, but in general, how we view the outlook of the Sangharsh, it can't be dictated by niji kamjoriyan. Our parents have niji kamjoriyan, we have niji kamjoriyan, and weakness is only uprooted once you first recognize it. ਜੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ that's a weakness. ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਮਾੜਾ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਆ ਪੁੱਠੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਵਰਤਦਾ ਆ that's a weakness. You can't just like water over it and be like I'm not going to fix that. ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲੇ ਮੇ ਤਾਂ ਉੱਠ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਕੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਇਹਨੇ ਵਜੇ ਉੱਠਣ ਦੀ and you hear that within the panth already ਕਿ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਵੇਲੇ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਜਾਪ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਅਭਿਆਸ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਲੈਣਾ ਹੈ that's not okay either. There's a sentiment politically that's okay, but when you take Khalistan outside of Naam, Bani, Abhyas, Rahat, and everything, then that's not okay. Then that's just covering up for your own weaknesses, and that's what I think our parents, when we view them, they do have kamiyan kamjoriyan. They are coming out of a different traumatic period, and there's still a level of respect. But I will say one thing: I don't have so much respect for my parents that if they ever tell me to stop, that I'd actually stop. Like that's not gonna work. I would just be like, "Tusi apna kam karo, main apna karda hai." You're still my parents, thoda fir bhi pote hain, but eh nahi hon gal honi. Because jehda maat pita guru da darja hai, that comes first. And tusi mainu eh gal sikhai hai, te hon utte hi main pehra dena hai.
I agree. And Nawabi Pen, we'll hear from you, and then we'll wrap it up.
The ਅਖੀਰ ਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਆਈਡੀਆ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਆਈਡੀਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਆਲਰੇਡੀ ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਉੱਭਰਿਆ ਸੀ ਨਿੱਕੀ ਜੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਜੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਆਰਕਾਈਵ ਬਣਾਈਏ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਦੀਪ ਵੀਰ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹਦੀਆਂ ਸਪੀਚਾਂ ਨੇ ਫੋਟੋਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਆਮ ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਨਿੱਕੀਆਂ ਨਿੱਕੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ 'ਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਲੱਭ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜਾਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਕ ਵੀਡੀਓ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਦਿਲ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਗੀ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਸੀਗੀ ਕਿ ਲਾਈਕ ਸੜਕ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿਨਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਟੈਂਟ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ ਬਸ ਓਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਪੱਥਰ ਜਿਹੇ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੇ ਦੀਪ ਵੀਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠਾ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਰੋਟੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਇੰਨੀ ਇੱਕ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕੌਲੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਭੇ ਸਾਗ ਪਿਆ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਚਮਚ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਰੋਟੀ ਤੇ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਖਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਹੁਣਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਛੋਲੇ ਖਾ ਕੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਛੋਟੀਆਂ ਛੋਟੀਆਂ ਬੜੀਆਂ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜਜ਼ਬਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸਮੇਟਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਜੈਕਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਆਰਕਾਈਵ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰੀਏ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਪੀਚਾਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਆਂ ਫੋਟੋਆਂ ਹੋਣ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਓਪਨ ਫੋਰਮ ਵੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੋਈ ਸਪੀਚਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਫੋਟੋਆਂ ਨੇ ਵੀਡੀਓਆਂ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਆਰਟ ਵਰਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਓ ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਪਲੋਡ ਕਰੀਏ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਕਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਜੀ ਹੋਊਗੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਬਲਿਕਲੀ ਅਵੇਲੇਬਲ ਹੋਊਗੀ ਜੇ ਕਦੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਛ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਉਹਦੇ ਚੋਂ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੋਸ਼ਲ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਹੈਂਡਲ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਕਰ ਲਏ ਨੇ ਥੋੜੇ ਜਿਹੇ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲਾਂਗੇ ਰਮਦੀਪ ਕੌਰ ਨੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਪਾਇਆ ਇੰਸਟਾਗ੍ਰਾਮ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਐਟ ਆ ਦੀਪ ਸਿੱਧੂ ਆਰਕਾਈਵ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹ ਫਾਰਮ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਵੀ ਪਾਵਾਂਗੇ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੁਛ ਆ ਸਬਮਿਟ ਕਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਬਮਿਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ ਤੇ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬਸ ਇੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਬਾਕੀ ਰਮਦੀਪ ਕੌਰ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਐਡ ਕਰਨਾ ਤਾਂ ਕਰ ਲਓ
I guess मैं थोड़े logistically कई चीज़ां कह देनी है. So basically, we're aiming to collect any videos, artwork, photos, anything that are related to Deep Sidhu and also Shambhu Morcha Kisan Morcha. Anything that he said, anything that he did. We're hoping to create some type of timeline of his story and his journey. And please use the Google form to upload any information. The more details, the better. And this way, we'll be able to create, collect his speeches and photos and artwork, and be able to provide them as a resource for our next generations. And in this way, we'll also be continuing to honor Deep Sidhu, and we'll be able to continue their soch as well, because we'll be able to provide the resources and access to his soch without it being co-opted by any, Niji politics or by any Indian narrative. And, just like, Deep focused on educating himself on Sikh history, sheaths, and the foundations of our, Badshahi and sovereignty, our project will have the ability to be this resource for future Sikhs and for anyone who is influenced by his journey to truly learn what he was talking about and what he was so passionate about. But yes, in the coming days, we'll be fully, furnishing out the details. But we have created an Instagram already, and the Google form is live. And yeah.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a really amazing project. And it'll be, it's lucky because we've got so many videos and things of Deep in this moment. So it'll be really, really good. If anyone wants to say anything in closing, any last word, and, Neta si Fateh Bologna.
Yeah, I always have something to say, so I wanted to leave it on something. I like the idea of the journey timeline. ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਆ ਆਈ ਬਲੀਵ ਦੈਟ ਐਜ਼ ਐਨ ਦੀਪ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਹੈ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਬਾਹਰ ਆਉਗੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਦੇ ਆਲੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਈ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੁਣ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੇ ਜਾਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈਂਦੀਆਂ like one thing I never knew was that by Gurjant Singh Jahedar Gurjant Singh and Deep had met him quite a few times when he was a child. And we're talking to Bhupinder Singh Budhsingwala here, who's by Gurjant Singh's Patija. And he was talking about as in what those mulaqats were like, how Deep described them to him. So I think there's an opportunity there for even people like that to participate, because his timeline doesn't start a year and a half ago. His politics reinvented itself a year and a half ago. But ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਨੀਂਹ ਵੱਜ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ from a childhood, ਇੱਕ ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ like ਕਹ ਲੋ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਖਿੱਚ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਉਧਰ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਵਾਂ ਤੇ I think ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਖਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ he tried his hand at a bunch of different things in life and ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸੇਵਾ ਲੈਣੀ ਸੀਗੀ and he got ਮੁੜ ਕੇ got dragged back into the siyasat of the Panth and actually like being a balara for the Panth. So I think those are really, really important pieces to capture. Like I said, generationally, this will be one of the biggest things that happens or has happened in this generation. So capturing the reality of his story, his soch, and then connecting that back to the soch of like either the Sangharsh before him or that's still going on, Sant Jarnail Singh, by Fauja Singh, and going all the way back to the Gadri Babe and everything, you'll see the connection to Raj diyan gallan. Te oh jehdiyan Raj diyan gallan hain, like as in they're a beautiful thing. Like as in like when you look at Raj and imagining Raj, it still gives you like this opportunity to kind of like imagine a better place, a better world. And once you establish it, the whole idea is to kind of like live up to that dream, which most people fail at. But I think like as in like ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਾਜ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਰਾਜ ਸੀਗਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਰਾਜ ਵੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਰੇ ਹਾਂ ਰਾਜ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਹੈ and these types of ਗੱਲਾਂ like they're archives for the future like as in like people you go back 45-50 years now like it's hard to say that June 84 is 40 years almost out now. Go another 40 years into the future and 80 years is like us thinking about the Qadri Babe. There's a connection, but it's a very, very distant connection now. So sounding the itihas in the moment for generations to come is more important now than ever. So just, I would hope everyone remembers that. It's 40 saal ho gaya since June 84. And we seem to think 100 years ago when the Gadaris were around and the Babe, like the Bakar Akalis were around, that is so far removed from us that we don't have a real connection with it. We have this like philosophical Jajabati connection with it, but we don't understand it because it's so far removed. This is going to be so far removed, the 1984 to 1995 period, in the next 40 years or so, is going to be so far removed that we're going to be looking at the 2020s and 30s as what was going on. What can we find inspiration from? Because that's what people are going to be connecting with. So I think this sounding of itihas in this project, it is needed. And it's needed not only for Deep, it's needed for many other figures and many other things that have happened over the last 40 years. But we can use this time to really build something, an archive that will actually like let our children kind of see what kind of sometimes like speaking without fear looks like. Sant Jarnail Singh's grainy videos from 40 years ago are still probably the number one thing I watch on a weekly basis, just because Sachadi Galjadi or Talia, he said it 40 years ago and is just as relevant now. Jehdiyan gallan Deep kar gaya now, 40 years from now, if we're still in this Sangharsh fighting for Raj, they're still going to be relevant. So it's a very important piece right now.
Thank you everyone that joined, and please follow the archive project and share it as much as you can, and contribute. Collectively we can build this. This has the potential to be a really important project going forward. So yeah, I think Brahmdeep Benji just shared the social link again. Thank you very much everyone for joining. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.